The sun rose lazily on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold. The wind carried the scent of the sea and the rhythmic sound of waves breaking, like a living breath. It was an ordinary summer Sunday, until fate decided to change everything. Miguel walked alone along the wet sand, leaving footprints the sea quickly erased. He was a man of few friends and many invisible scars. He worked with his hands, and in them carried both the strength and the weariness of someone who had endured more than he could tell. He lived in silence, and perhaps it was that silence that drew him to the sea every day. There, among the waves, he could exist without being remembered. The sun climbed slowly, the heat began to grow. Families arrived, children ran with buckets, the smell of sunscreen mixed with the salty wind. Miguel watched it all from a distance. He liked seeing joy, even if he couldn't feel it himself. Then a scream cut through the air like a blade. "Help! My son! Someone help!" Miguel's heart leapt. A few meters from the surf, a woman ran frantically along the shore, pointing toward the water. Among the waves, a small body struggled against the current, sinking deeper with every second. Miguel didn't think. He dropped what he was holding and ran. The wind whipped his face, the sand burned his feet, but he felt nothing except urgency. He dove in without hesitation. The water was cold and violent, pushing him back. But he kept going. The waves crashed against him, the salt burned his eyes, his muscles screamed. The child vanished and reappeared, swallowed by foam. "Hold on, kid," he shouted, voice choking. When he finally reached him, the boy barely moved. Miguel grabbed him tight, keeping his head above water. The child coughed, cried, gasped for air. Miguel held him close and began the long swim back, each stroke a battle. But the sea doesn't let go easily of those it chooses. A massive wave rose behind them. Miguel had only a second to breathe before it swallowed them whole. The water spun him around, slammed his body against the current's force. He pushed the boy upward, and for an instant, saw the small face break through the foam, calling out. Then everything went dark. The sound vanished. The world dissolved into liquid silence. Miguel felt his air run out, his body give way, and then, nothing. On the beach, chaos. The woman screamed on her knees while a lifeguard sprinted into the sea. Minutes later they pulled the boy out. He coughed, breathed, cried, alive. But the man who had saved him had vanished beneath the waves. The search began. Boats, ropes, shouting voices. The sun was setting when someone cried out. Found him. A body floated near the rocks. It was Miguel. Pale, unconscious, but with a faint pulse. They rushed him away. They fought for him. And after long hours he breathed again. When he opened his eyes, the sound of the sea seemed distant. Unfamiliar faces surrounded him, voices blurred, the light too bright. They asked his name, he couldn't answer. The hero was alive. But the man had disappeared inside him. The sound was distant, as if it came from underwater. Slow beeps, footsteps, muffled voices. Miguel opened his eyes with difficulty. The white light blinded him for a moment. The air smelled of alcohol and iron. A hospital. He tried to move, but a weight pinned him to the mattress. Arms, legs, everything hurt. A woman in a lab coat approached with a calm smile. "Easy, it's all right. You're safe." He tried to speak, but no sound came out. His lips were cracked, his throat dry. The doctor filled a cup with water and pressed the straw to his mouth. Miguel drank slowly, still trying to understand what was happening. "You nearly drowned," she said gently. "But you were rescued in time. We found you unconscious, but now you're out of danger." He blinked, confused. Drowned? He tried to remember. The sea, the scream, the boy. Everything came in flashes, shattered fragments like broken glass. "What's your name?" the doctor asked. Miguel stayed silent. The question echoed inside him, but no answer came. His name, he knew he had one, but it was lost somewhere in a dark void. He looked at her, trying to hide the panic rising in his chest. I don't know." The doctor's expression changed. She called a nurse and wrote something on a clipboard. Then she reassured him. "It's okay. This can happen after a major trauma. Memory loss is often temporary." But he didn't hear the rest. He was trapped in that emptiness. He didn't know who he was, or where he came from, or if anyone was waiting for him. Hours later, the door to his room opened quietly. A woman stepped in, her eyes swollen from crying, holding the hand of a small boy. The child clutched a crumpled drawing, a sun and a sea drawn with crayons. The woman took a deep breath, walked closer to the bed, and spoke in a trembling voice. "Hi, you're the man who saved my son." Miguel turned his head toward her. Her eyes glimmered with both gratitude and guilt. "If it weren't for you, she choked. He wouldn't be here. The boy stepped closer, shyly placing the drawing on the blanket. I drew you, mister, he said softly. The man the sea almost took. Miguel looked at the paper. There was a stick figure with open arms amid blue waves, and a small yellow smile in the corner. Something tightened in his chest, an emotion without a name. But when he tried to remember the moment, only pain and a blank white void filled his mind. I don't remember, he murmured, avoiding her gaze. Anything. Not what I did. Not who I am. She nodded slowly, holding back tears. That's okay. What matters is that you're alive. You gave your life for my son. I'll never forget that. The boy climbed onto the edge of the bed, his eyes full of innocence. I remember you in the water. You pulled me. And then the sea took you away. Miguel closed his eyes. For a moment, he felt the cold water again, the weight of the waves, the distant scream of the woman. But it was only a flicker, and then it was gone. The nurse entered, saying he needed to rest. Before leaving, the boy looked back and said, I'll come back to see you, okay? My name's Lucas. Miguel just nodded, the boy's name echoing inside him like a sound from a dream. When he was alone, he looked at the drawing left on the blanket. The little figure smiled amid the sea. Miguel ran his finger across the paper, trying to recognize that man. But the face was a stranger's. And for the first time he felt afraid. Afraid of what he had lost. And afraid of what he might find if he ever remembered. The following days passed slowly, as if time itself had forgotten to move. Miguel remained in the hospital, watching the world through the window, the sky changing colors, birds crossing the wind, and the sea always distant, like a mirror he was afraid to face. He couldn't remember his own face before that day. The doctors showed him his documents, but nothing sparked recognition. The name Miguel Duarte sounded like it belonged to someone else. The doctor said that sometimes the mind protects itself by erasing what hurts too much. But how could he know what hurt, if he didn't even know who he had been? It was Helena, the boy's mother, who insisted on staying close. Every day she and little Lucas came with flowers, fruit, or just shy smiles. At first, Miguel felt uneasy. He thought it unfair to receive affection from those who should only be thanking him from afar. But little by little, their presence began to fill the quiet emptiness inside him. Lucas always brought drawings. He drew the sea, seagulls, boats, and always the same man with open arms, surrounded by blue waves. It's you, he'd say, smiling. Miguel never knew what to reply. One afternoon, while Lucas played in the hallway, Helena stayed alone with him. She watched the man sitting on the bed, staring into nothing. How are you feeling today? She asked gently. Strange, he said after a pause. It's like I woke up inside someone else's body. She lowered her eyes. What you did for us. I can't explain how much it means. But I don't want you to feel obligated to anything. You deserve a fresh start. Miguel took a deep breath. Start over, he repeated as if testing the weight of the word. Hard to start over when you don't know where you came from. Helena smiled softly, unsure what to say. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was heavy, full of things neither dared to name. When he was discharged, Miguel had nowhere to go. No relatives had come looking for him, and the police were still investigating his identity. Then Helena, after days of hesitation, made the offer. Stay with us, just until you get back on your feet. I don't want to be a burden. You saved my son. It's the least I can do. Miguel accepted. Helena's house was simple but full of life. It smelled of coffee and lavender soap. The boy waited at the door, excited, showing him the guest room. Now you have a home, mister, he said, with a smile that melted any resistance. During the first few days, Miguel barely slept. He thanked them for their kindness, helped wherever he could, fixed a window, changed a light bulb, repaired a broken chair. He was good with his hands, even if he couldn't remember where he'd learned to be. At night, though, sleep came heavy and tangled. Nightmares haunted him. Flames, screams, the crack of breaking wood, and sometimes a face. A woman's face, distorted by memory, calling his name. Always the same sound, like a lost echo. Miguel, come home. He would wake drenched in sweat, heart racing, not knowing whether he was crying from fear or longing. As time passed, Lucas grew genuinely attached to him. The boy followed him everywhere, curious, telling stories about school, friends, and the tides. Helena watched them together, and a quiet, unexpected feeling grew inside her. Something between gratitude, affection, and fear. She knew that man didn't belong to her, that he had a past somewhere, but fate seemed to have delivered him to her doorstep. One night, as they washed the dishes, Helena asked, "Do you believe life gives second chances?" Miguel dried his hands, thoughtful. I don't know. But if it does, maybe we never realize when we're living one. She smiled, eyes glistening. Maybe you're living yours now. He looked at her a moment too long. Something in her gaze both comforted him and scared him. That night, Miguel left the house quietly and walked to the beach. The full moon lit the calm sea. He stopped before the waves, feeling the cold wind on his face. He closed his eyes. For a second he heard distant voices. Laughter. Music. A flash of memory, a workshop, the smell of wood, and someone singing in the background. And suddenly that same woman's face appeared in his mind, smiling. He opened his eyes, breathless. The sea was calm, but inside him, something had begun to stir. Something that didn't want to stay forgotten any longer. Time passed unhurriedly. The weeks blended into a quiet routine. Sunny mornings, Lucas's laughter, the smell of coffee coming from the kitchen, and the distant sound of the sea. Life seemed to have found its rhythm. But peace, sometimes, is only the pause between two storms. Miguel had grown used to the silence of mornings. He liked waking up before everyone else, sitting on the porch and watching the light change colors. He still didn't remember who he was, but he was beginning to recognize himself in what he did. He fixed things, cut wood, tended to the plants. There was something in his hands, an instinct, that told him he had always been someone who built things. One morning, Helena came in holding a folded newspaper. She looked hesitant, her face pale. They published an article about you. Miguel looked up. Helena handed him the paper. On the front page, a photo of him, serious-faced, taken at the hospital, and the headline in bold letters. The hero without a memory, the man who faced the sea and forgot who he is. The article told the story of the rescue, the memory loss, and the mystery of his identity. Helena tried to laugh, masking her unease. I told you people would get interested. A man with no past, that's the kind of story that sells. Miguel didn't answer. Something about that image disturbed him deeply. Seeing his own face and not recognizing it was like staring at a stranger's portrait. He spent the day restless, feeling as if the newspaper had opened a door that should have stayed closed. Somewhere else, far away, a woman flipped through the same paper in a quiet room. When she saw the photo, the world stopped. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Miguel? She whispered, her voice trembling. Her name was Clara. 2 years earlier, her husband had vanished without a trace after a fire in the workshop where he worked. They said he had likely died. The body was never found. She cried, searched, waited, and one day, tired of waiting, she learned to live with the absence. But now, that face in the newspaper tore open everything she had tried to forget. It was him. The same eyes, the same scar near the eyebrow. He was alive, and he didn't remember her. 3 days later, the gate of Helena's house creaked open. It was a gray afternoon, the air smelled of rain. Helena opened the door and saw a woman standing before her, suitcase in hand, the newspaper clutched to her chest. Good afternoon. I'm sorry to bother you, the woman said, her voice firm but trembling. I came because of the man in the article. Yes, Miguel? Helena asked, confused. Are you a journalist? The woman took a deep breath. No. I'm his wife. The ground seemed to vanish for a moment. Helena stood speechless, trying to process what she had just heard. Before she could respond, Miguel appeared on the porch, drawn by their voices. When he saw her, he froze. The woman took a step forward, tears in her eyes. Miguel, it's me. Clara. He frowned, searching somewhere in his mind for that name, that face. Nothing. Only a strange sensation, a dull ache, like a distant echo. He hesitated. I don't remember you. Tears streamed down her face. Helena watched silently, her heart tightening, unsure whether to feel glad or afraid of losing something she hadn't even known she had. Clara opened her bag and pulled out a photograph. The two of them, smiling, covered in sawdust, in a woodworking shop. Miguel held a plank, she held a paintbrush. There was love in that picture. Simple, real. He touched the photo with trembling fingers. A sharp pain shot through his head. Flames. Screams. The crack of burning wood. And for a second, the same face, Clara's, appeared in his memory, covered in smoke, shouting his name. He pressed a hand to his forehead and staggered. I saw, he whispered. I saw something. Fire. Pain. Clara rushed toward him, but he stepped back, frightened. No, don't come closer, he said, breathing hard, overcome by a fear he couldn't explain. Helena stepped between them, speaking softly. He's still trying to understand who he is. Give him time. Clara wept. I waited so long. I thought you were dead. And now you're here, alive but so far away from me. Miguel didn't know what to say. Rain began to fall, soft, silent. The newspaper, forgotten on the wall, started to dissolve under the water. And in Miguel's eyes there was everything: guilt, confusion, fear, and the haunting feeling that somehow he had come back to life in the wrong place. The silence in that house was never the same again after the day Clara appeared. She stayed at a nearby inn, visiting Miguel carefully without forcing any memories. Helena tried to remain calm, but inside, something was breaking little by little. She knew that reunion was inevitable and fair, but knowing that didn't make it any less painful. Miguel, in turn, seemed divided between two mirrors. In one he saw the life others said was his. In the other he saw what his heart felt in the present. The quiet home, the woman with the gentle eyes, the boy who called him a hero. Memories returned slowly like small cracks in the ice. Sometimes a word, a smell, a sound brought quick, confusing flashes. One night, Clara brought him a wooden box darkened by time. Inside were photographs, a ribbon, and a ring engraved with the initials C and M. "You made this box yourself," she said softly. "You said it held everything you wanted to remember." Miguel took the ring and turned it between his fingers. A shiver ran down his spine. Suddenly the memory came, the sound of hammers, the smell of the workshop, laughter, hands stained with paint. And then fire. Screams. Clara crying outside. The wood collapsing, the suffocating heat. And then the sea. The same sea that now seemed to have erased part of him. Miguel stood staggering. "I remember," he murmured, breathing hard. "I remember you. The workshop. The fire. I tried to save someone." Clara held his hands, eyes filled with tears. "It was my brother. You ran in to get him out, but the roof collapsed. When they pulled you out, you were unconscious. And after that, you disappeared." She embraced him, and for a moment he stood still. He didn't know whether that embrace comforted him, or tied him to a past he no longer belonged to. The next morning Miguel went down to the beach. The wind was strong and the waves restless, as if the sea reflected his own confusion. Helena found him there, gazing at the horizon. "You're remembering something, aren't you?" she asked, stepping closer. He nodded without looking at her. "Yes. And the more I remember, the more lost I feel." "Lost why?" "Because the man I was isn't the man I am now." He took a deep breath. "I loved that woman, I know I did. But when I look at you at this place, I feel like I belong here." Helena looked away, holding back her emotion. "Miguel, you have a life before me. And maybe you need to go back to it." He met her gaze, eyes glistening. "And what if this new life is the only one that makes me want to keep going?" The words hung in the wind. Neither of them had the courage to say anything more. That night, Clara went to Helena's house. She found Miguel on the porch, alone, staring at the stars. "I thought you were still at sea," she said, trying to smile. "I always am," he replied. "Even when I leave it, it never lets me go." Clara stepped closer. "We can try again. I've waited so long." Miguel looked at her with tenderness and sorrow. "I remember you, Clara. But I don't remember being that man. And I'm afraid to pretend I still am." She cried silently and he only held her hand. No promises, no lies. From behind the window, Helena watched the scene with a heavy heart. She knew, somehow, that this moment marked the end of something that had never truly begun, and the beginning of an impossible choice. In the days that followed, Miguel avoided both worlds. He worked with his hands, fixing things, trying to fix himself. But inside, the conflict grew. On one side, the love he remembered, on the other, the love he was learning to feel. One afternoon, Lucas came up to him, innocent as always. "Mister, are you going away?" Miguel knelt down, brushing the boy's hair. "I don't know, little one. I think the sea hasn't decided yet." Lucas frowned. "Then ask it to let you stay." Miguel smiled. "I'll ask." But he knew the sea, like life itself, never gives easy answers. That night the wind changed. Clouds gathered over the ocean. And as if fate were calling him once more, Miguel felt that something was about to happen. Something that would bring back what the sea hadn't yet taken. And perhaps force him at last to choose between remembering and living. The night arrived heavy, loaded with dark clouds. The wind blew in gusts that made the windows shake. The smell of rain mixed with the salt coming from the sea, the same scent that had followed Miguel since the day he woke up without remembering who he was. He couldn't sleep. He paced through the house in silence, thoughts swirling like the waves outside. Clara slept at the inn, Helena and Lucas were in their room, and he, alone, felt as though the whole world was waiting for something from him. Something he still didn't have the courage to give. Suddenly, a thunderclap split the sky. Miguel went to the window and saw the sea raging under the flash of lightning. That sight held him still. The sound of the waves seemed to whisper, calling to him, like a distant echo from the past. "Miguel?" The voice didn't come from outside. It came from within. An ancient, deep call, impossible to ignore. He went out. The rain began to fall, thin, cold, and the wind pushed him forward as if fate itself were leading him back to the water. Helen awoke to the sound of the door slamming. She looked out the window and saw Miguel walking toward the sea, his body lit by lightning. Her heart raced. "Miguel?" She shouted, but her voice was lost to the wind. She ran outside, barefoot, her clothes clinging to her body, soaked by the rain. At the edge of the beach, the sea roared. Miguel stopped, feeling the wind lash his face. Each wave felt like a memory trying to surface. Flashes, fragments, faces, fire, pain. Until suddenly everything came back at once. The fire. Clara's scream. The roof collapsing. The despair of not being able to save his friend. The blind run to the sea, the dive, the current sweeping everything away, including himself. Miguel fell to his knees in the sand, hands over his face, crying beneath the storm. The memories burned, but with them came a bitter peace. He finally remembered who he was. Helena reached him, breathless. She knelt beside him, tears mixing with the rain. "Miguel, come back home." He looked at her, and in her eyes there was both fear and love. "I remembered," he said, voice breaking. "I remembered everything. Then come back. I can't go back." He looked toward the sea, where lightning danced over the waves. "Back then I was someone else. I lived with guilt, fear, emptiness. The sea erased me so I could start again." Helena gripped his hand tightly. "So what will you do now?" Miguel looked at the horizon, the wind striking his face. "Choose who I want to be, not who I was." When the storm finally passed, the sea calmed, as if it had heard and accepted his decision. Miguel and Helena walked back together in silence. On the porch, Lucas was waiting, clutching a blanket, eyes full of worry. When he saw Miguel, he ran to him and hugged him tightly. "I knew you'd come back," the boy said, his voice trembling. Miguel lifted him into his arms, moved. "Now I know it too." The next day Clara came to say goodbye. The sky was clear, the sea calm. She walked up to Miguel, who was waiting for her in front of the house. "I'm going back to my town," she said, her eyes tired but serene. "I think each of us lost something that night. Maybe time won't erase it, but we learn to live with what's left." Miguel nodded. "Thank you for coming." "And you, for returning," she said with a faint smile. "Even if it was to another place." She hugged him one last time and left without looking back. That night, Miguel sat alone on the porch, listening to the sea breathe. The wind carried the scent of life, the scent of beginnings. He picked up a piece of wood and began to carve, as if his hands remembered what his heart had finally accepted. Helena appeared in the doorway quietly. "You just can't stay away from the sea, can you?" Miguel gave a faint smile. "The sea took me once. Now it's given me back. I guess we're even." She walked over slowly and sat beside him. For a moment there were no words. Only the sound of the waves, the smell of wet earth, and the certainty that, somehow, what the sea had taken, it had returned transformed. Time passed slowly, like the sea at low tide. The days once again carried the sound of waves and the smell of fresh coffee in the kitchen. Helena laughed more. Lucas grew, curious, full of questions and dreams. And Miguel relearned what it meant to live, without haste, without fear of forgetting, without needing to remember too much. The storm from that night felt like a distant dream, and sometimes he wondered if it had really happened. But all it took was the salt on his skin, the wind on his face, to know that yes, the sea had taken one man and returned another. The small workshop behind the house had become Miguel's refuge. He worked with wood the way one prays, silently, with focus, and with an almost sacred reverence. Each piece he made seemed to carry a fragment of the story the sea hadn't managed to erase. One day Lucas appeared holding a piece of wood. "Will you teach me to make a boat?" he asked, eyes shining with innocence. Miguel smiled. "A big one or a small one?" "Small. To sail in the river." "Then let's make one that knows how to find its way home." The boy frowned. "Boats can come back?" "The ones that have a destination, yes," Miguel said, smiling, speaking as much about himself as about the boat. At night he would walk along the beach. Not out of nostalgia but out of gratitude. Each step in the sand was a silent conversation with the sea. "I understand you now," he thought. "You never wanted to drown me. You wanted to teach me how to breathe." And the sea in response simply breathed too, calm, deep, eternal. Years passed. Lucas grew up. became a man. One day Miguel watched him leave carrying the small boat they had built together. He said he wanted to see the world, to follow the wind. Miguel, his heart tight, only replied, "Go. But remember where the sea brought you back." Helena aged gracefully. Every sunset the two of them sat on the porch side by side saying nothing. Their love had no hurry, no promise. It was made of presence. One morning Miguel woke before sunrise. He stepped outside and walked down to the shore. The horizon was golden, the water calm. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt his entire life pass like a gentle film, without pain. The laughter, the losses, the fire, the forgetting, and finally the finding. There, standing before the same sea that had once taken him, Miguel smiled, a smile full of peace. The wind brushed his face like an old friend. And for a moment he could swear he heard that old voice again. "Miguel?" But this time it wasn't a call. It was a farewell. "Thank you." When the sun had fully risen, Helena found him sitting on the sand, gazing at the sea with tearful eyes and a serene heart. She walked up to him and he reached out his hand. Without saying a word, she sat beside him, and together they watched the sun climb, as if the world had been made for that moment alone. Neither of them knew what would come next, and for the first time it didn't matter. Because the sea was calm. Because the silence at last was beautiful.